morning we're kicking things off here in the Pantheon with I think a very appropriate but also somewhat daunting challenge, which is the great divide that we're going to discuss in this panel. We have a panel comprised of some excellent dividers. We have Kamakshi Sivarakrishnan, who's the CEO for Drawbridge. We have Jennifer Cooper, who's Director Industry Strategy at Adobe. We have Jayant Kadambi, who is co-founder and CEO of YuMe, and Damian Blackden, who is architect with or for or of Device 9. And your moderator is none other than the great Gian Fulgoni, who is executive chairman and co-founder of ComScore. Let the dividing begin.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. So what I'm going to do to kick this off is to show you 3 or 4 slides that will give you some background data that will put the discussion into context, and then we're going to open it up for what I hope will be a provocative and informative discussion. So here are the issues that we're going to try to touch on in the 25 minutes that we have: the viewability of digital ads, the targeting accuracy of digital, the issue of fraud, which is something that I think is, from a positive perspective, is now getting a lot more attention within the industry. And then maybe one of the more important challenges we face, the future of cross-platform campaigns in terms of execution and measurement. So those are the topics. Let me show you some stats that you may or may not have seen. So this is a measurement of the percentage of ad impressions that are in view in the US on desktop devices measured by ComScore. So basically it's saying that if you look at the premium sites, that 53% of the impressions are in view, which means that almost a half are not in view. So that's an issue that we have to wrestle with. And then if you go off onto the exchanges or the networks, then the viewability rate drops pretty dramatically down to 31%. So 70% or so of the impressions are not in view. And if you trace the drivers of the difference, one of the big drivers is the amount of fraud that can happen or non-human traffic, bot traffic, that happens out on the exchanges. So I want to talk a little bit about that today. If you look at the demographic targeting rates, and this again is US data, looking across advertisers from these different vertical industries, this is demographic targeting. You'll see that the overall level of accuracy is about 44%. So this excludes the viewability issue. So these are ads that are reaching a person, which says that over 50% of them are not reaching the right demographic target segment. And we want to talk with the panel about the positives and negatives of that, because surprisingly there are some interesting positives, even though the number is low. We want to touch on cross-platform. I want to show you this, because I think this is really important when we think about the explosion of these mobile devices. So these are ComScore data again, US, tracking the total amount of time spent on the internet over a 3-year period from December 2010 to December 2013. Time spent in the US on the internet has doubled in just a 3-year time period. And if you track the drivers of that doubling of time, you will quickly spot the importance of smartphones and tablets. Tablets didn't exist back 3 years ago. So these mobile devices have kind of come out of nowhere and basically have expanded the pie. And so I think that's pretty good news for publishers. So that's the background data that I wanted to show you to set the stage for the discussion. So let me kick it off, and I've got a series of questions here. We don't have a lot of time, and I hope we'll be able to get through as many here as we can. So Damian, let me ask you the first question. Are you surprised that those viewability rates are so low?
No. Not really. I think there are a number of very understandable reasons for them being low. Latency, long page lengths, people working with different tabs in their browsers. There's also sinister ones that you've mentioned, like bots, fraud, or whatever. But up until relatively recently, it hasn't been a priority for the industry. And I think the reason for that has been because there's an abundance of media inventory out there. There's been so much supply, and that has been used by, in the main, direct response advertisers whose primary objective has been sales. And if your objective for an advertiser is sales, or an agency, you're being rewarded for sales, as a lot of people here have been talking about pay for performance, then it has often made sense just to push a large amount of ads out in very, very cheap media, rather than adding, if you're an airline, a data overlay on proximity to proximity airports, travel, whatever. And visibility falls within those priorities. But it does seem to be now to be changing, because we've now got a new wave of brand-focused advertisers, many of whom are here, who care much more about who they're reaching and the quality of the environment and matching the medium and the message far more than the direct response advertisers, and that will pressure the publishers.
So can we conclude then that viewability has now become an issue because as branding advertising money starts flowing onto digital, that you are generally going to be paying on a CPM basis, and if you're paying on a CPM basis, then viewability becomes really important?
Very much so. If it's about who you are reaching and the quality of the environment, it becomes way more important than just the basic outtake of numbers of sales, and that's what will apply the pressure to the publishers.
Jayant, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I agree. I think in the last 10 or 15 years, if you look at just the trend of brand advertising, it's slowly increasing, especially on websites that display advertising. And as that increases, viewability becomes a far more important. Yeah. The attentiveness, the receptivity, and people actually watching the ad rather than just clicking it. So.
Yeah. Okay, good. So that's an important point to bear in mind here. Let's talk about this bot activity. And Kamakshi, let me ask you, and I know that you do a lot of work across different devices. Give us some perspective on this fraudulent activity that's happening out there.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective that we bring in, because a lot of our media buying decisions happen on mobile inventory, that is primarily on phones and tablets. And even among that, there is sort of two ecosystems that we address, which is the mobile web ecosystem and this in-application ecosystem. And in application environments, the supply-side platforms or the real-time bidding environments are operating with a software development kit that is actually placed inside of the application to support the monetization and the ad serving. So the bot activity and the fraudulent activity is relatively much more in control when you compare it to a mobile web environment, because the software development kit belongs to the SSP that is controlling the monetization landscape. Yeah. So you're talking about, relatively speaking, far less fraudulent activity in application environment compared to the mobile web environment.
Now, is that true of both the phone and tablets, or is that more?
Absolutely, exactly the same case. And that affects sort of the viewability equation as well, in the following sense that content is much more optimized and delivered for maximal impact in an application environment. Good. You swipe through content rather than scroll through. Yep. So viewability is less of a question in a mobile environment, especially in application, rather than when you think about traditional media and traditional content.
John, let me ask you for your comments on fraud, especially in the desktop environment. Are we finally beginning to pay attention to this, and is it long overdue?
Yeah, I mean, look, just from a practical economic perspective, the search and display industry, and the industry is 10, 15 years old, and it's $100 billion. There's going to be a lot of people trying to make money, especially when advertisers for a long time have been worried about making sure people come into the store or buy things based on a click, and you can sort of, after a while, watch the processes and automate them. Yeah. As Kamakshi pointed out, in other platforms, it's going to be more difficult to generate robotic or fraud activity due to the sort of infrastructure and ecosystem in those places in the application environment. But from an attention perspective, when people find out that they're paying for, I don't know, what was that, 69% of their stuff is now viewable, and there have been lots of media coverage about, especially when you're buying on exchanges on a blind basis, half the activity, a third of the activity, 3/4 of the activity is, quote, robotic or fraud. People will start to pay attention. Most of the customers that we see today are asking for either independent verification or some sort of, how shall I say, comfort that the activity that is coming in is not fraudulent. And there's various ways to show that.
So, but are you convinced it's a problem that can be solved? Or, I keep hearing stories that as soon as one solution is put in place, then the fraudulent activity changes to tackle a different issue, and it's like you just keep chasing your own tail.
So, I think Kamakshi she alluded to the solution, which is, generally speaking, in the industry today, Ad safety, fraudulent checks, verification, all those activities have been very reactive. You know, it's sort of, I will tell you after something happens, and then I will promise to not do it again. I think with things like, there are mechanisms you can do to make it proactive, which is check beforehand and not deliver the ad. And those require, in cases of mobile and tablets and connected televisions, they require software to go in that is watching what's happening, essentially. And in the web as well, in the video environment, and we do a lot of video, you're sort of forced to put software into the video player, and then you can monitor things. So I think that's a better way of doing it than being reactive.
Although being reactive, if you can be reactive in real time, you have a better shot at addressing some of the issues, right?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that, you know, when you're dealing with a brand that's, especially, you know, just pick a brand that's been around on television for years and years and years, people, they would rather not deliver the ad into a bad context or a fraudulent environment or something that's not appropriate to save their brand sort of image. So we still continue to think that the proactive way of doing things is the right way to go.
Gian, if I may add a point, I think the real way to attack this in a real-time fashion would be to, again, behind that identity. Does that cookie and that device, be it mobile or your desktop browser, have a real identity that can be inferred with a high degree of certainty that you can adapt in a real fashion in case there is any fraudulent activity or in case there is any non-viewable impression. And that's where some of the technologies that we are building, although our focus is primarily around solving the problem of monetization, data, and targeting, we can evolve much more smarter.
You're raising a really interesting issue there, which is basically touching on the future of the cookie and the ability of a cookie to accurately tell you who is on the machine. Are you thinking then or saying that down the road you think we will eventually move to a non-cookie based way of delivering ads?
Hey, we're living that today on a mobile device and application. There is no real notion of a cookie.
Right. No, I understand on mobile, but you know, the reality is still that 85% of all ad dollars digitally is still spent, going against the desktop. How do you think that the cookie will be replaced on the desktop as a means of?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talked about the Google, Ad ID.
Right.
Is that essentially bringing a paradigm that is very similar to what is a software device identifier on a mobile device to the desktop world. It's about tantamount to the same thing, the Google Ad ID. So we are essentially moving to a framework where probably it's a cookieless framework. It's a persistent identification of a user in an anonymous fashion on a particular device. Now, getting that identity across devices is sort of the future of advertising.
How does Adobe look at that particular issue in cookies?
So I don't think it's an Adobe issue. I think what Kamakshi is talking about is a cookieless environment that I think is absolutely true. We're living it today, and I think the way that it's being addressed in some executions is in lookalike modeling and predictive modeling based on behavior, clickstream analysis, and things where you have a lot of anonymous activity happening for campaign executions and things of that nature. So there are a lot of measurement technologies, ComScore being one, Adobe being another, where there's a lot of data being gathered just in the interaction with both pages and applications and mobile and phablets, right? The new device, which is a phone and a tablet. So in all of these environments, if you are able to collect the right data associated with the interaction, with campaign interaction, with content interaction, with pages interaction, over time, you may not even need to have the cookie identify what exactly it is that you need to dynamically deliver. And so I agree. I think we are already living in the past cookie environment. We just need to have, the rest of the ad business and industry catch up.
I think you need something which will join everything up, though. I think you have the device identifiers and whatever it is. You can build, it's just a business we're in order to track mobile, and then in order to then put mobile into context and the rest of the websites in context and bridge across them, then you need some other types of identifiers.
That was the marketing pitch for Drawbridge.
But it's actually much more extensible. I completely agree. I think that the issue is identifying both registered and identifiable and anonymous data together. And obviously doing it in a cross-platform environment is extremely important. Yeah. But doing it in non-mobile environments and environments that are looking at both display, video, multimedia, in-game, all the different types of campaigns, bridging, as Damian says, the anonymous and the identifiable data is really critical.
So let me ask you a question that kind of touches on the transition from cookies to some other means of identification. All right, legislators in a whole bunch of countries are after the cookie, right? And they're trying to make, to define it as being opt-in, which is maybe in Europe, we're already gone there. We're not there yet, thank God, in the US. But does another identifier raise the attention of the legislators that you somehow have to get some consumer opt-in before you can identify even anonymously a person across devices?
Well, I mean, if you look at PII issues, right? So legislative issues deal with PII data and privacy and things like this. But if you look at the mobile environment or the phablet environment where you're instinctively and inherently already identified because, through the carrier, you're identified by your number, and that's just how it is. So they know who you are. And if you think of the world for a minute of having no anonymous display or desktop, let's say that world existed. Let's say everything was actually a phablet world where everything is identified based on your phone number through the carrier, then you know exactly 100% of your audience. In fact, you could infer based on that information what your household separation is between different devices. And if you have, like my household, 19 various devices between all the, the kid devices and the iThings and the and the non-iThings. And if you can identify each one, and I think, these guys are probably working on this already. Don't want to steal your thunder.
Go right ahead.
But if you really look at the reality of today, it almost is, I mean, it's a little, it's not comical, but it's amusing, right? That we're still talking about PII data as some kind of monstrous thing that legislation, goes after.
Oh, well, unfortunately, maybe that is the way that the legislators look at it. But it sounds like we might be better off with some non-cookie identifier, but remains to be seen if the legislators are going to address that one. Okay, let's go back to viewability. And Jayant, I want to ask you this question. So, one of the expectations when the viewability metric was first defined, and interestingly, let's remember that it came out of the 3 trade bodies in the US representing the publishers, the advertisers, and the ad agencies. I think there was an expectation that it was going to cut down on kind of garbage type inventory, and that the laws of supply and demand would then maybe result in an increase in prices for the viewable impression. What's happening in that regard?
I think as far as we can see, as you pointed out, there's probably, in your data, 20% difference between the purchase directly through a publisher or a premium publisher in viewability and one through an automated or an exchange or system where there's just pretty much anyone can sign in, yeah? The general reason people have been buying the latter is the cost is lower, and they've done it with their eyes open because the publishers, the premium publishers, are the cost a little bit more, and it's just more susceptible to fraudulent activity and viewability concerns and other things. So I think people have been used to spending $4 or $10 or X dollars to get a certain set of returns. They're going to come back and say, and they're doing it in general in the buys that we see, we want to make sure that we have 100% viewability when we make the buy now.
But are the publishers then saying back, okay, but what used to be $4 CBM is now $6? At the moment, I think the control still lies because of the supply availability on the exchanges with the advertisers. We are, at least in our business, we are not seeing
a supply constraint across a viewability metric today.
So
right
you don't
now.
think prices are yet going up?
We don't see it at the moment.
Okay.
Will they go up on a supply constraint basis? Absolutely,
You
if the
think,
supply is constrained.
I can add a different perspective. So on the mobile side, in application, there is IAB standards have the banners and the sort of the interstitial, which is full screen takeover. Both of these have, because of the placement and the rendering and the nature of the application, viewability is not a front and center
Right.
issue. But a full screen takeover is 100% viewable insofar as the consumer is concerned.
Yeah.
Pricing is dramatically different for a full screen takeover interstitial versus a banner.
Yeah.
So you do see a higher expectation on the publisher's side. Whether it is triggered from the notion of viewability, that's a separate question, but you do see a price differential.
So what we're seeing on that is actually that people are asking us whether, they're not asking viewability directly, they're asking us to give them a measure of attention or receptivity to the ad. Yeah, some people have said the word engagement,
That's
et
right.
cetera.
That's right.
So the question that we're getting, especially from a brand advertising perspective, is give me some indication, not that just you hit a male 18 to 49, but the person who saw the ad, whether it was 80% viewable or 70% viewable or 50% viewable, to her point, is less of an issue versus show me that they were receptive and attentive and aware of
Yeah.
what they were putting in front of them. And if you're in a full page takeover on a mobile environment, it's clearly 100% viewable. The secondary question is, are you paying attention at that point?
That's right. I'm actually curious, if I may ask, how many of you in the audience have heard of a CPE metric versus a CPM? Okay, so cost per engagement, right, is what CPE is, and it started when Facebook ostensibly opened, their developer network, and that metric became the way that a lot of the social campaigns were measured and continue to be measured today, except it's an elusive metric. And it's interesting because I think that as we start talking more and more about viewability, the 50-second, the 10-second, the X-second, engagement and the CPE metric is going to come back in, and it's going to become an IO line item more and more and more, not just in the make good guarantee, but if you can't give me premium placement make good if my campaign goes sideways, give me a CPE metric that I can rely on, and I can put that on the IO. I think that's where we're continuing to go.
So then let's take away from, summarize the discussion. So viewability, much less of an issue on mobile. In the desktop world, the advertisers are kind of pushing back at paying at the moment, paying a premium for a viewable impression.
That's correct.
Obviously, the publishers would like to get that premium, but they're not yet. We've seen, and that's consistent with what we're seeing, although I suspect that down the road, the publishers and the advertisers will agree on a higher CPM, because we're seeing a dramatically higher sales impact as you tighten up that viewability definition. Kellogg's let us publish some numbers in that regard. Okay, let me, I see the red light is flashing. And I don't know whether that means we're out of time or about to be out of time. I think it meant 5 minutes. I want to jump to the issue of whether the demographic data that I showed, is there a positive side to that data, Jen? In the sense that, how would you compare that to what you get with traditional legacy media? Is television able to deliver targeting accuracy levels or anywhere near that?
Yeah, so, most of our business is with television advertisers, and I think generally in the digital world, everyone is sort of has the perception that the TV advertising business is not as effective as digital because digital provides more data and metrics, and I think that's generally true. But let's not kid ourselves. The TV brand advertisers, when they spend $20 million, they know exactly what should happen on that $20 million to the sales of a product over time. It's not instantaneous, but they know the effect. It's not as efficient as it should be. If you compare it to the data that you put up, that's frighteningly inefficient as well, right? Yeah. Especially if you put in viewability as well. Yeah. But the good news is we have a lot of data and information that we can make that number go up.
But I think that that world is changing rapidly, whereas, TV, as you call it, traditional, is based on, as we know, panels and samples. And even though we could say that brand advertisers for television actually know based on history, but I think that history is being rewritten, and I think it's changing very, very rapidly. And if you talk to a marketer, if you talk to a CMO of Coca-Cola, right, who's trying to figure out what their media mix is going to be today, I think they would give you a different answer based on what they used to know 10 or 15 years ago, where digital was not as pervasive. And so I completely agree that data is 100%, necessary in order to figure out what to do in digital. But there is absolutely no clear measurement of whether I'm watching TV, or there's this commercial that actually Adobe ran where it's a supply chain commercial, and at the very end of it, there's a baby sitting there clicking on an iPad, and the parents go, the kid really likes that thing, and the supply chain is building ships and cutting down trees, and there's more paper, more paper, more paper. I think that if you don't, connect those dots for the advertisers in the room, for agencies in this room, I think being aware what data digital actually provides, and relying only on what they used to know that television did a while back, I think is not looking at the future.
Yeah. Damian, what do you think about the GRP, a viewable GRP, in terms of providing a consistent metric across legacy?
I think it's a good start. I think there's a requirement to reinvent the current metrics that you used on TV into digital in order to provide marketers a level of consistency, therefore confidence, as you were saying, and then elevate it with the additional data that you can overlay, the technographics, the demographics, the fact that we can be more granular when we go onto mobile and so forth. And then on top of that, find the means to link across the devices so that we can tell the holistic brand stories from one to another, measure and control average frequency, which drives reach, and so forth.
So fundamentally, you think it's a plus?
Yeah, it's a plus. It's a good start. It's a foundation because it provides consistency, and I think we have enough data in digital to build upon it and to make the digital channels more efficient as the old evolves into the new.
So does that mean that you also believe that the GRP is not an obsolete metric?
Not for the time being.
Not for the time.
No, there are a much wider range of metrics, if we'd heard cost per engagement, all of these things, but we have to have a consistent foundation. There's no harm in building that out.
I think it's incomplete. I think that if you're only relying on GRP data and not taking into digital GRP, there's no such thing as a digital GRP today. I really want to find one, actually, because if you're able to effectively connect the offline view of broadcast television and an online view of similar content, and you can create a cross-device GRP, there's a startup in there somewhere. I mean, that's the golden goose.
That might be a drawbridge.
Yeah.
I'm just listening. I don't need to do any of the talking. The panelists here are doing it themselves.
Yeah, but you're not doing video, right?
So actually, we had a video announcement a couple of weeks back about how we are supporting video now on cross-device. Across mobile.
There you go.
How many devices have you identified now in total?
So we declare a number in terms of the number of devices that we have matched to a corresponding cookie on the desktop, and that number is over 1 billion. And we back it to about 400 million users is our estimated number that we have identified across device presence.
Yeah, cool. I see the red light is still flashing, so I think that we're going to have to wrap it up. Let me ask you each to just give one takeaway that you think is most important from your perspective from this discussion here today.
The future of media buying, be it on the advertiser or on the publisher side, is around cross-device capabilities.
Jennifer?
I think that the media mix, again, whether you're looking at social or mobile or desktop or even traditional, really needs to integrate all of these channels. And in order to do it effectively, data that is fundamental really needs to drive those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, for brand advertisers to get additional data from all the different devices, mobile, tablets, wearables in the future.
That's right.
And in addition to the web data they're getting to get cross-device, GRP, frequency, reach, engagement,
Yep.
is the trend, clearly.
Yeah.
Damian?
3 years from now, 87% of all connected devices globally will be either mobile phones or their tablets. Most of those don't work with cookies now, so have a strategy for that, because whatever that is, that will be your digital strategy.
That's brilliant.
I would add that even before we write off the desktop, remember that while the share of time spent from mobile devices has exploded, there's no evidence that total time spent on the desktop has yet declined. So we can't forget that. Okay, we've certainly run out of time. Join me in a round of applause for our panelists, please. I hope it was helpful.